Hello friends! We are insanely happy to see this much activity on our video about the Titanfall series. That's why we didn't waste any time and began making a new one, but this time about the Doom universe. We are thankful to everyone who supported us. Thank you! In this video, we'll talk about all the Doom series games, in order, compact, and informative. After all, every game in the series affected the entire gaming industry and added something new. And at the end of the video, we'll talk about our thoughts on the release date of the next game and its possible plot using currently existing info. And for now, leave a like and subscribe. Without further ado, we begin. Enjoy! The first game in the series came out in December 1993 and changed the very concept of games for PC. In the 80s, the cinema was dominated by horror and science fiction, so we can easily see where the main developer of the game, John Carmack, was getting his ideas from. The game made a real revolution. The engine was better compared to its grandparent, Wolfenstein 3D. The gameplay kept its explosive drive, but the levels looked more grim and were filled with hordes of demons. The design inspired by Aliens and Evil Dead was vastly different from Wolfenstein 3D. I wonder if some of our viewers have played Wolfenstein 3D. If so, leave a comment. The storyline was simple. The players were given a role of a nameless space marine who by chance ended up in Hell. The Hell invasion begins, and now our brave space marine will have to become a hero and grind through swarms of Hell beasts. Instead of focusing on the plot, Doom was focused on technological features. It featured texture maps for the walls, multi-level floors, and dynamic lighting. Carmack developed a way for making windows between rooms so the players could see what is happening in the bordering rooms. Doom was the very first multiplayer shooter. Carmack found a way to connect several game clients through the internet. Thanks to this, the game had a multiplayer mode called Deathmatch, which then became an established classic. But that's not all. ID Software compiled the game data, graphics, music, levels, into WAD files, separating them from the main engine. This allowed the mod-making community to change and add content without affecting the main game files. This innovation resulted in a community of mod makers being formed, which is active to this day. A similar approach was applied by such companies as Valve and Blizzard. The release of Doom gathered the attention of not just gamers, but also people that were pretty distant from the gaming industry. Mass debates about violence in video games began, and everyone took part in those: politicians, parents, all kinds of critics. This argument is still alive, even though not to the same extent. That being said, Carmack himself is sure that his games only bring positivity. Well, they definitely help with dealing with stress. The sequel to the first game followed quickly. In just slightly over a year, Doom to Hell on Earth took the action, like its name suggests, to Earth, to which also got the hordes of demons. After dealing with the invasion on Mars, our main hero finds out that the motherland of humanity is also being attacked, and throughout over 30 levels, he is tasked with sending the monsters straight back to Hell, and at the end even goes there himself to destroy the most powerful demon. Doom 2 wasn't much different from the previous game, but thanks to dynamic gameplay and interesting locations. After all, Earth is more appealing as a battlefield to a common player than the faraway Mars is. The game was received very warmly by the audience and added another $100 million to the developer's bank account. Just like it was with the first game, the sequel became an object for close attention of the modding community, which momentarily began creating new content. And that's how the project called Final Doom was developed, which included 64 levels separated into 2 campaigns: TNT Evolution and the Plutonia Experiment. It came out in 1995 and was distributed by ID Software as an official product. The year was 2004, and the development of a new Doom was coming to its end, and it finally came out and caused an ambiguous effect. The third game took a step away from the tried formula and was a kind of an experiment. The idea was to step down from the dynamic gameplay for the sake of a horror element. As a result, those who expected the new game to be as dynamic as the previous instances in this series were disappointed. The players that accepted the new rules of the game divided into 2 groups. One group was seriously impressed by the horror aspect, fearing every sound and trying to shine light at every corner. Others, though, were annoyed that the developers are trying to balance between a spinal shooter and horror. The player shines his flashlight on a monster, gets scared, but only for a moment, until they remember that they have a shotgun. After this, they draw their weapons and the game turns into a shooter, the dynamic component of which was severely lowered. As a result, the gameplay turns into a tiresome cycle of switching between your weapon and the flashlight. Let's get to the graphics. They noticeably improved. The Martian base was impressively detailed. The dance of light and shadow, flashes from shooting your weapons in dark corridors, many small elements, and moving particles. Unfortunately, Doom 3 was unlucky as it got a neighbor in the face of Half-Life 2 with its breakthrough physics system and impressive detalization. Even so, ID Software managed to make a horror shooter. Unfortunately, it was way too niche. In the future, they tried to appeal to the unhappy part of the community by releasing a remaster. In 2012, the BFG edition came out. Maps were slightly lighter, and the players were allowed to use the flashlight while holding their weapon. The lighting seemingly got worse, and that didn't help the atmosphere. As a result, the game became less scary, but hasn't improved in terms of dynamics much at all. Friends, what do you think? Which franchise is better, Doom or Half-Life? Development of the next game began shortly after the release of the Triquel, and the game was officially announced in 2008. Doom 4 was not like any of the previous games of the series. The developers were making a serious thriller in the spirit of Call of Duty, telling us about how hell appeared on Earth. ID Software were trying to make a project true to its roots, but at the same time able to compete with the giants of the genre. Same old Call of Duty, Battlefield, and other shooters. As a result, the game about hell got into a development hell and got canceled after several years of development. In 2011, the studio began a reboot of the series. The new game was given the name Doom, without any subtitles or numbers. John Romero was absent from ID Software, and in 2013, John Carmack also left the team and joined Oculus VR to work on virtual reality devices. Nonetheless, the developers were able to complete the project and in 2016 released the shooter on PC and consoles. The new Doom returned to its roots. Minimal story, dynamic gameplay, great graphics, maximum violence. The campaign tells us a story of an ancient warrior, the Doomslayer, whose mission is to fight countless hordes of demons. The storyline guides the players through corridors and halls of a Martian complex of the UAC Corporation. We are sent to hell and back, and in the finale are given a hint for a continuation. The gameplay includes dynamic shooting and ruthlessly finishing off weakened enemies, as well as boss fights, simple spatial puzzles, and searching for secrets. Multiplayer offers us to battle in classic modes, and in some of the modes the players even get the ability to turn into demons. And all of this with an amazing soundtrack by Mick Gordon, a recognized Australian composer. The shooter received positive reviews from both the press and the players and sold well. Doom Eternal took the best of the reboot and proved that it can repeat the success. Compared to Eternal, Doom 2016 looks slow. The game simply took the familiar mechanics and injected it with a ton of adrenaline with steroids to boot in the form of dashing and a hook, which allow the player to quickly reach a demon with intent of dispatching of it in a brutal fashion. Other than that, another special weapon was added as well as new upgrades, broadening the possible style of the game. New execution variants were added as well as extra lives. Did this affect the speed of the gameplay? Yes, it became even faster. Does this make the game easier? No. Your extra lives, armor, and health will burn in seconds if you relax. The enemies now have weak points, which made killing them easier. It is not easy to hit those, though, as many of them require a special weapon and approach. The combat became more dangerous and breathing time in between shorter, all to make the gameplay uninterrupted, or you could say eternal. A slight parkour element was added to the locations about which the community actively complained. But there are also a couple supporting arguments for this decision. Dashing midair and hooking walls and beams allows quick movement between arenas as well as allowing you to reach your enemy faster in several places. The story ended up being more controversial. On one hand, we have an appealing piece of new lore. On the other hand, the players are still left with several of their questions being unanswered, and the story hasn't gotten the development which it undoubtedly deserves. Yes, we remember Carmack's testament, but the players are teased, and now they want more. Besides, the standards from back then have changed, and more than once. At the current moment, there is only one mode in multiplayer, Battle Mode. Its base is an uneven fight between the Doomslayer and two demons, trying to destroy him with their abilities and summoning their lesser brethren. Playable, but more modes and maps would have been appreciated as the mode gets boring quite fast. Regarding the new game, I think you won't be surprised to realize that new games in the series come out around every 5 years. It's enough to look at this chronological scale. That's why we're sure that the next game will come out no later than 2025. There is no information given about the plot of the next game other than a quote given to Polygon by the Doom Eternal director, Hugo Martin. While this is the end of the story arc that began in Doom 2016, we planted a lot of stakes in the ground with that story, and we've been able to flesh out a lot of those things throughout the course of Doom Eternal, and to do 2 DLCs. So that story arc will end, from the time you woke up in the Sarkovus to the end of the DLC, but there are more stories to tell with the Doomslayer for sure. Could we tell a story about when the Doomslayer first came to that place with the Sentinels? Almost like a more medieval setting, a fantasy setting. I think as you play the DLC too, you'll see lots of hints of what we could do moving forward, maybe even in the future. Again, our hero is somewhat timeless. I mean, literally, he's immortal. So we could tell all kinds of stories. Hugo Martin gave us an obvious clue that ID Software are interested in a continuation of the Doomslayer story. In that case, the story of Slayer getting to the Sentinels seems to be the most interesting and logical. What would you like to see in the continuation? We're looking forward for your comments on the matter. For now, we'll stop here. As for you, leave a like, because the story of Doom doesn't end here. If we get 5,000 likes, we'll make a review of possible continuations of Doom. Thank you. Only play good games, and goodbye.